Hello and welcome to the Race to Zero session on net zero fashion. I'm very excited about today's session. I am your moderator for today, and I'll be talking through the different panels. My name is Layla Petrie. I'm the CEO of 2050, and I'm the joint chair of the Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action, who is hosting this session in collaboration with Race to Zero and the Climate Champions. So if we can go to the next screen. So today's agenda, perfect, thanks Grace. Today's agenda, we'll shortly hear from Nigel Topping, the champion for COP26, who will talk to us about the industry's role in reaching the Paris Agreement targets and why it's important for industries like the fashion industry to collaborate and come together on milestones. We'll then hear from Amanda Gorman and Taylor Beidler, who have creative readings reflecting the viewpoints of the youth and what the youth expect from this sector in terms of transformation. Then we'll then have our first panel, which is looking at the approach to alignment on a set of key industry milestones, and particularly bringing together the expertise and the existing work of a number of key industry groups and technical organizations. So really looking at a synergizing approach between all these different organizations. Then we'll have a chance to answer some questions. And then the second panel will focus really on the role of a just transition. So thinking about the Global South and the role of their needs in setting out a pathway and a milestones. And also thinking about the role of financial institutions and policymakers and how they can support the transformation. Finally, we will have a close from Gonzalo Munoz, who is the COP25 champion, who will talk about whether we're on track for the Paris Agreement and what it's going to take to reach a 1.5 degree pathway. So some quick housekeeping before we kick off. If you have a question, we very much encourage those, and please add them all the way through. Please put it in the question box rather than the chat box, because that helps us make sure that we identify the questions. And Carolina and Louis will be monitoring the questions and will help bring them forward for discussion during the Q&A. So I will now open up to Nigel Topping, who is the champion for COP26, who will share some opening remarks about the industry approaches and why they're so important. Thank you, Nigel.
Well, thank you, Layla, and thank you 2050 and the Fashion Charter. Can I just first of all make sure you can hear me?
Yes.
Great. Well, it's a real pleasure to be with you all on day 2 of the Race to Zero dialogues. And we call these dialogues, and it's a reminder that dialogue is different from debate. Debate linguistically comes from the same source as batter, meaning to try and beat each other into submission to prove that we're right and the other person's wrong. A dialogue is an opportunity to listen respectfully to sometimes very different and sometimes challenging points of view, but with the intention that we learn. And this is so important because we know that climate change and the associated fragilities and inequities are collective action problems, and they will only be addressed through collective action solutions. So I'm really thrilled to have such a diverse group here looking at the technical and human pathways to the zero carbon future. Gonzalo and I often talk about the ambition loop, which at its simplest says that governments can't do this on their own, which is why the high level champions role was created, and why in particular ambition and clarity and momentum from those working in the real economy is so important, because as you all become more ambitious and clearer about the shared way forward, it makes it much easier for policymakers to raise their ambition. So we create that positive feedback of ambition. And it takes a whole system to change. So we also talk a lot about systems transformation, the whole value chain. I think the fashion industry has a long and complex value chain. It starts with farmers. It includes a lot of SMEs. There's a lot of civil society organizations with a keen interest in labor practices, unions, finance, as you mentioned. So it's a complicated system always. And if we're going to transform it, then ultimately we have to find a way to move together. That's why, as the high-level champions pioneered by Gonzalo and all the partners in the Marrakesh Partnership last year, we've been working on this idea of creating collective We've called them pathways. Some people call them roadmaps. I think fundamentally what we mean is shared industrial milestones, a set of shared milestones around which we converge, particularly in the short term. And I want to really emphasize that if you think you're right, but you're a little bit different from everyone else, then you're actually undermining the collective momentum. So converging on the short term is one thing which allows us to get to scale. It de-risks for everybody. It particularly de-risks it for people who've yet to commit to act. If a new actor comes along and sees 17 different initiatives saying slightly different things, normally it takes them more than a year to decide to act, by which time they've missed a budget cycle. So this convergence of these shared industry milestones is absolutely crucial. And I know that there's a lot of great initiatives in the sector. I'm looking forward to listening to hear more of the progress you've made in that convergence, so that in the next 12 months we can really focus on taking that shared understanding of those industrial milestones and recruiting more actors in that system from wherever they are in that system, so that we can reflect the urgency of this race to zero. We called it a race for a reason. We really are racing against time. We know we have a limited amount of time to bend the curve, and this must be the decade of delivery. So I'm really looking forward to learning a lot today, and to all of you joining the race to zero, and to joining and committing to those shared industrial milestones, so that by the time we get to Glasgow, we can show the world and we can tell a story of the fashion industry collectively, not everybody, but a critical mass having committed to that road to zero, and to demonstrating that you're now, by the time we're in meeting Glasgow, on track to delivering a zero carbon fashion future. Thank you, and I really look forward to going back to listening mode and learning a lot from all of the speakers. Thanks, Layla.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nigel. I think that really gives us a keen sense of the why. And for more of the clear why, I would now like to turn over first to recording from Amanda Gorman, and then to hear directly from Taylor Beidler.
Earthrise. On Christmas Eve, 1968, Bill Anders snapped a photo of the Earth as Apollo 8 orbited round the moon. Those three guys are surprised to see from their eyes our planet looked like an Earthrise, a blue orb hovering just over the moon's gray horizon with deep blues and silver skies. It was our world's first glance at itself, our first chance to see a shared reality, a declared stance and a commonality, and a glimpse into our planet's mirror. But as threats drew nearer, our own urgency became clearer as we realized that we hold nothing dearer than this one place we all call home. We've known we are in the throes of a climactic crisis, of change that some will say just will go away, while others simply pray to survive another day. For it is the obscure, the oppressed, the poor, who, when the disaster is declared done, still suffer more than anyone. The climate crisis is the single greatest challenge of our time. Of this, you're certainly aware. I say this because it's saddening, but I cannot spare you from knowing an inconvenient fact, because it's getting the facts straight that enable us to act and not wait. So I tell you this not to scare you, but to prepare you, to dare you to dream a different reality where, despite disparities, we all care to protect this world, this riddled blue marble, this little true marvel, to muster the verve and the nerve to see how we can serve our planet. You don't need to be a politician to make it your mission to conserve, to protect, to preserve that one and only home that is ours, to use your unique power to give next generations the planet they deserve. We are demonstrating, creating, advocating. We heed this inconvenient truth because we need to be anything but lenient with the future of our youth. And while some see this as training and sustaining the future of our planet, there is no rehearsal. The time is now, 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 because the reversal of harm and protection of a future so universal should be anything but controversial. So, Earth, pale blue dots, we will fail you not. Just as we chose to go to the moon, we know it's never too soon to choose to hope. We choose to do more than cope with the climate crisis. We choose to end it. We refuse to lose. Together we do this and more, not because it is very easy or nice, but because it is necessary. Because with every dawn we carry the weight of the fate of this celestial body orbiting a star. And as heavy as that weight sounded, it doesn't hold us down, but it keeps us grounded, steady, ready, because an environmental movement of this size can only be another form of an earthrise. To see it, close your eyes. Visualize that all of us leaders in this room and outside these walls or in the halls, all of us change makers are in a spacecraft, floating like a silver raft, and we see the face of our planet anew. We relish the view. We witness its round green and brilliant blue, which inspires us to ask deeply, wholly, what can we do? Open your eyes. Know that the future of this wise planet lies right in sight, right in all of us. Trust this earth uprising, all of us bringing light to exciting solutions never even tried before. For it is a hope that implores us at our uncompromising core to keep rising up for an earth more than worth fighting for.
I grew up with a great-grandmother who once owned a children's clothing store in upstate New York. We would take annual back-to-school pilgrimages, buying clothes that did not fit, but I would one day fill. I remember my great-grandmother gumming pins as she trimmed the tail ends of my trousers, or running her fingers along my sleeve. You can tell everything in one touch, she would say, flicking her hand away as if there was a stain only she could see. See, I was raised to believe that clothes make the woman, that the right fit will invigorate me. But if that liberation comes at a cost, are any of us truly free? Throughout our focus groups, we asked what changes they would like to decree, what they looked for when buying a product, what the industry should strive to be. Here's what they had to say. Clothing may be our second skin, but our trust is worn too thin to invest in anything further. We've stopped believing in transparency when the word itself is now opaque. So let's pinpoint exactly what sustainability looks like and allow it room to regenerate, to use it as an instrument of change rather than a one-note buzzword. Greenwashing is not an absolution. The solution lies in our ability to congregate, collaborate, and incorporate. In order to remove the stain, we must connect the chain, to embrace, not waste, a system of circularity, to do for our great-grandchildren what my great-grandmother did for me. Let's double the anticipation by halving our carbon participation. After all, 2030 is only 10 years shy of tomorrow. If a fashion revolution really is every day, how do we make today different? Well, today I challenge you to set targets too impossible to ignore, to define, refine, and redesign your outlook. Fashion is only worth the price if the cost adds up to net zero. When single use holds a universal impact, how do we sustain one another? Let's start by finding less in the more, when more of us accept nothing less. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think those are actually amazing. I'm a very technical, not very creative person, and I actually found those incredibly inspiring and exciting. So thank you so much to both of you for those fantastic interventions. So with a very high bar raised in terms of our expectations, I would like to now pivot to our first panel to really talk about how are we going to meet this challenge of reaching net zero and really achieving a lot between now and 2030 and 2050. So I will first of all introduce the panelists in alphabetical order. So Andrew Martin, who's the Director of Global Stakeholder Engagement and Business Development for SAC. Eva von Alvensleben, who is the Executive Director and Secretary General of the Fashion Pact. Lorraine Pepper, who is the Managing Director of Textile Exchange. Morten Lehmann, who is the Chief Sustainability Officer of the Global Fashion Agenda. And finally, Stefan Seidel, who is the Joint Chair of the Fashion Industry Charter for Climate Action and the Head of Corporate Sustainability for Puma. So welcome, panelists. So what I'd like to do first of all is turn to Stefan. So obviously the Charter is helping to host this session, so you're very much in the hot seat here. So can you touch first of all about why the Charter has actually chosen to try and support this process of alignment under the Race to Zero sort of umbrella? What does this mean? What does the alignment need to look like? And also what role does the Charter have in kind of supporting that decarbonisation?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having us, Leila and Nigel and team. It's great to align and to come together and speak about how we can align our industry on the race to zero and also on the climate targets. I mean, the challenge, as we have heard from Nigel and others before, to align our industry with the Paris Agreement targets is huge. We are so interconnected and we're so intertwined within our supply chains, but also within the organizations who are working in this industry, that collaboration is key. That goes for companies, for fashion companies, apparel footwear companies, but also for the industry initiatives working in the sustainability space. The Fashion Charter was founded with a single target in mind and a single goal, and that is to align our industry with the goals of the Paris Agreement. The Fashion Charter is the only initiative, as far as I'm aware, in our industry, which solely focus on climate action, and therefore, and also runs under the umbrella of UN climate change. And therefore, we see ourselves in an ideal position to convene the industry. That doesn't mean we want to duplicate efforts or do things that others are better positioned to do and have more expertise. If I look at my fellow panelists, I can see Marie here from Textile Exchange, and just yesterday we discussed that in order to have, for example, a material target within the Fashion Charter, we don't need to do that on a charter level. We could do that in collaboration with Textile Exchange, who has led more sustainable materials challenges and work in this field for years. So that's how we see ourselves as the one initiative who are solely focusing on climate action and who's helping others to convene. And yeah, so again, that would be my answer to your first question.
Thanks, Stefan. And the second question really is about, out of the roadmap process itself, we kind of see some key similarities between all the initiatives. So everybody kind of sees the need to have potentially kind of around a 45% reduction by 2030, approximately. Lots of organizations really see the need for action on renewable energy or kind of coal phase out, some more sustainable materials. So, what are some of the things that you think are most important that are coming out of this process of aligning with everybody's different organizations and also industry actors? And, what does that do in terms of mirroring the action under the Charter itself?
Yeah, so again, I think climate action is a pre-competitive space. We all need to work together here. So that starts with the ambition level. We have started with a 30% interim target when we launched the Charter. Now we know that 45% is perhaps what is needed to achieve the targets we all want to achieve. So I think that is one element of this alignment process, to align the ambition level between the individual organizations, an important one. But of course, even much more important is to align on concrete action outcome And here, we all know what needs to be done. You just mentioned it, Leila. We need to move to more sustainable and less carbon intensive raw materials. We need to clean up our manufacturing chains. We need to move there to renewable energy. And this we can only do together and in collaboration. And here really, I think we have 8 working groups in the Charter, as you know, since you're also one of the co-chairs of the steering committee. So you know this very well, but for everybody else, we have 8 working groups within the Charter. We have a working group on raw materials, on manufacturing energy here, coal phase out. We don't need to do that ourselves within the Charter. So for example, if we look at the Sustainable Apparel Coalition and sort of its brother, the Apparel Impact Institute, there is a large outreach to suppliers. I believe, Andrew, you can correct me if I'm wrong. There's about 10,000 facilities that are using the HIG FEM, the Facilities Environmental module of the Sustainable Apparel Coalition. So in that process of alignment, it would be so wonderful if we could motivate all those 10,000, or the majority of those 10,000 manufacturers, and some of them are our suppliers, speaking with my Puma hat on, to share the targets, to share, the journey to phase out coal from their boilers, to phase out, fossil fuels and move to renewable energy. So we know what needs to be done. We have a draft, sort of, call it roadmap, call it milestones. I had a look, in preparation for this meeting. There's a lot of empty space in the year 2021 still, so I think we still have a bit of homework to do. And even the year 2025 looks a bit empty, so I think we need to fill those gaps, and we can do that collectively. And from the Charter side, we're happy to coordinate this effort.
Thank you, Stefan. So similar themes, because I want to pivot to Ava now, and obviously the Fashion Pact is also a big collaboration between key industry actors. So thinking about the fact that we are kind of really working towards a shared set of milestones, a kind of shared blueprint almost for where the industry needs to get to between now and 2050. How useful do you think this alignment process to kind of build that roadmap or that milestones document, and the very act of coming together in this kind of dialogue, how useful is that for the work of the Pact?
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Leila. It's a pleasure to be here. I think alignment is critical. Alignment is critical for 2 reasons. The one is that we all need to, move the needle in the same direction to really have impact. We have seen that a lot of efforts have been doing in climate, especially, but we haven't really made the efforts or the impact that is needed to really meet the deadlines that are ahead of us. The second critical reason for alignment is really that it allows us to build a common baseline. And only with the idea of having a common baseline, we're able to measure our progress. And in that sense, it's the only way to actually really have impact. So the Fashion Pact was created around the principle that you bring the industry together in one room with one shared agenda, and you transform the industry. And so right now we have 1/3 of the global fashion industry as members of the Fashion Pact. And that gives us the opportunity to bring the weight of the industry behind one approach to really push the industry forward in the same directions to have impact. And as I said, alignment, you see it here on the bottom left corner of the slide. These are the 3 key principles of the Fashion Pact. And so they are, besides being CEO-led, because we really believe in the leadership from the top that really sets the agenda in the company and really accelerates the journey and implementation, really about the power of the collective, not replicating existing, but really actually aligning on what is already there, and then use really these power of the collective to move together, as well as going beyond existing. Nigel just said it, we are working on a very tight deadline. We have about 10 years to bend the curve on climate. There's no time to lose, and we really need to ramp it now up. So these key principles, basically, you could say, completely tie in or have as a requirement the idea of alignment, because we need to have an aligned approach, roadmap, pathway, whatever you want to say, in order to achieve those. So to measure our progress collectively, to act collectively together, to really have impact in achieving this target. So absolutely key.
And I'm aware that you guys have been through also an opportunity, kind of mapping of what those opportunities for additional value would be. And it'd be great to hear, a little bit about the process that you went through, and also, what role you do see the pact now playing in kind of having a unique contribution to the climate space, and also the kind of shared vision that we have here today.
Yes, great, and I come to that in a second. But as the Fashion Pact, our members, the CEOs have signed up to our global commitment, which is about reaching net zero, and which is about the implementation of the science-based targets. That's really, really key. And as I said, our principles are about not replicating existing, but really going beyond and building upon what already is out there. And in these efforts, we really work with technical experts all around the globe that bring the best solutions to the industry and help us to move together in the same direction, that help us really to find those white spots where you need the collective working really together based upon what already is there in the industry. And as I said, in climate especially, there are many amazing initiatives already out there. And so super happy, for example, to have the UNFCCC also speaking tomorrow at the webinar. And so this is really our idea of use what already is there, accelerate by putting the weight of the industry behind it, making sure that you don't replicate existing, but really work together. At the end, we all have the common goal. We all have the same target. We're all on the same deadline. I love the video you just showed, Leila, and really explaining that there's one planet and we're all living on it, right? So there is no way of escape, basically. So in practice, that really means for us that we work with these experts together, and on climate especially, as you know, Leila, we work with 2050, but also hand in hand with the UNFCCC to really make sure that we map the existing. We did this together with Systemic to really help us to find the roadmap and really see actually what is already there. And where are the opportunities, where you need the industry in a room, where do you have the opportunity to meet the CEOs in a room to really discussing together, what do we need to do collectively to really have the impact that we need. So absolutely super key to really not replicate existing, building upon what we already have, accelerating our journey, especially in climate, and driving actions with concrete impact as soon as possible.
Thank you so much, Eva. I'm now going to turn to Morten from the Global Fashion Agenda. Morten, you and McKinsey have worked together to create a new research piece that went out a couple of months ago, I think, on the future of climate and fashion. I'm very interested for you to kind of talk a little bit about, what has your research demonstrated in terms of what those key levers are, and also, how feasible your research has made it seem that we will get to net zero by 2050, or kind of make the steps we need to make by 2030.
Thank you, Leila, and thank us for having us. Before I do that, can I just give a big shout out to Amanda and Taylor, because I think, they're powerful speeches. The fact and the knowledge and the inspiration of having a diverse voice, young voices, is so important. And I think it's really something we can all learn from. It's important to emphasize the urgency, but also to paint a picture of where we can be, that we can have a prosperous industry that will create good jobs along the value chain within planetary boundaries. So also speak to where we can be if we take action now. I think that is so powerful. I think we can be better at not only speaking about what we're not doing correctly, but where we can be also if we really accelerate. But going back to our Fashion on Climate report, unfortunately, it shows that if we continue with our current activities in terms of CO2 reduction abatement, we'll miss the Paris Agreement by 50%. So we'll miss the 1.5 pathway with 50%. So that's, of course, doesn't look too good. The positive news is that if we do accelerate, we can actually have our emissions based on 2018. So this is possible if we do accelerate. Going back to what Nigel said in the beginning, he said, governments can't do it alone. Often us working in the industry, we tend to say the industry cannot do it alone. So definitely we need the system change that Nigel said. We need also governments to really pick up the pace for this accelerated abatement to place. So I think it's about all the players doing this. The other positive thing is that we calculated a cost curve to look at the investments needed. And it shows that 50% of the required costs and investments needed actually have a positive return on that investment. So there is a lot that can be done, a lot of low-hanging fruits. But it's going back to what Amanda actually said in her speech about a shared reality, because this cost and this return of investment is for the industry. But it's not always that the people or the players in the value chain doing the investment will reap the benefits. So we need to be better at sharing the costs in the industry, so that shared investment, those costs are actually distributed better and more equally across the supply chain. And of course, there are a lot of investments that are not low-hanging fruits, where we need more incentives than we have today to make sure that we don't only do the 50% that pays off right now, but we also focus on the harder ones, some of it being linked to materials and what Stefan also said.
Thanks, Morten. And then, so pivoting from very, very useful findings in your report to maybe thinking about then the process that we've committed to together of kind of coming up with the sum of the parts of the analysis and research that's gone before, the sum of the parts of the targets that have been set by each organization. I mean, how do you see that alignment process being useful for the industry? And especially kind of thinking about what Stefan was drawing on about, there are gaps still existing in those kind of interim milestones, interim goals that we might need to set ourselves on different levers. Do you think that this process is going to address that? And yeah, how important do you think it is to kind of commit to really seeing this through?
I really do hope so, because I do think we need to align on not only, I think Nigel said it very well in terms of convergence on short term. We as industry players cannot allow any confusion to happen in the industry in terms of what is the right thing to do. So I think we need to be really clear on speaking the same language, have that convergence. So you shouldn't be confused if you sit there as a brand or as a manufacturer and not knowing what is really the best thing to do, where should I allocate the most resources to get the most abatement on CO2. So we need to be very clear there. But I think also we need to be very clear on what are the gaps, and then work together and finding out what's the best division of responsibility that Stefan also said. Is it the charter that does everything, or what is the role of SAC or Apparel Impact Institute? I think that is necessary. I think we see a lot more of this than we have seen before. We have the group of fashion conveners. Just last night, several of us was in a meeting exactly on this point. So I think we're on a good path, and we just need to stay as committed to this as before, because we really owe it to the industry players and to the challenge we're facing.
Thanks, Morten. So actually, that brings us perfectly on to hearing from Sustainable Apparel Coalition. So Andrew, I want to turn to you and think about the analysis that you have done. So it's not just SAC, but also WRI and AII together on the key actions required also for industry decarbonisation, and to really reflect on whether you see these being, represented within the milestones process as we've got it so far, and if not, how do we make sure that they are?
Good. Firstly, thank you very much, Leila. And I feel quite daunted following such an inspiring, youthful interjection, and then this esteemed, and I use in the nicest sense, experienced panel that I'm with. So just to give a quick bit of background for people, I'll touch on the slide later, but the WRI and the Apparel Impact Institute, World Resource Institute, are working on a report in order to deliver an apparel sector a science-based target roadmap. The thinking really being that it's around ensuring we have an understanding of where the GHG emissions are in the value chain, and therefore how can we reduce them in line with science-based targets. And I'm probably going to repeat a lot of what everybody said, because I think it's about alignment. It's about having the same baselines. And I think I want to pick up on, from the work that we've done, or the work they've been doing with the report, on three sort of key areas that I think follow on very well from what everyone said. And I think they're very practical. And to Stefan's point, maybe this is some of the very quick 2021 work that needs to be happening now. And I think the three key things I want to pick up on first are, we think it's important that we find a way of having a single source of truth, that I think we find a way as much as possible of collecting and pulling together the data, that really we can have that core baseline of data that we can report on, year on year, that helps us identify where the issues are. And reporting on year also gives the opportunity to do the most important thing, which is then leverage. And by leveraging, that's about identifying opportunities for impact. And so Stefan mentioned the HIG FEM, the Facility Environmental Module, which has over 10,000 factories already collecting data. So we have a substantial amount of data that's already being used. And I think using that and building on that, we should, by the end of this year, with the work WRI and AII have, is actually have a preliminary data, a preliminary baseline. But that's not just been with the HIG FEM, that's also been together with the Textile Exchange Preferred Fibers and Materials Report. So you're already seeing, I think, activity where existing work and existing data is being pulled together to create this alignment. The second thing that's come across for us, and I'm getting quite practical here, but I think it's important we start moving in this space into, doing things to deliver against these targets. And that's what's become evident for us is the role, and I pick up on this key intervention slide, that's one of the outputs from the work that WRI and AI are doing, which is really around the influence that materials and raw materials have. And I think for us, it's become important to broader as an industry convene more and more with the material industry associations to really bring them in to help us with that data for the baseline from the leather industry, the polyester industry, but not just with the data, but also really calling to action the material industries to, what is their decarbonisation plans for 2050. And then the third thing that's come through, I think, from the work that we've been doing is really just reinforcing what everybody said here, which is we can't reinvent the wheel. We don't need another new initiative. We don't need another new platform. There are already existing platforms, initiatives, the SAC with the HIG Index, Textile Exchange, the Apparel Impact Institute. And I think one of the critical things we're saying here is how do we take what we've got? It's not all perfect. It needs improving. We need to find the gaps. But how do we take what we've got and build on that to deliver against those targets?
Thanks so much, Andrew. And I guess the follow-up question I want to really dive into is, we've heard about the scale of the challenge, but thinking specifically about SAC's remit, so kind of the tier 1 to 3 producers particularly, where do you see the biggest challenges that need to be overcome, or the biggest barriers that are going to maybe prevent decarbonisation? And what would you see as the role either of SAC or other organisations in to help kind of address those barriers?
So it's a great question. And I think, firstly, so if everybody doesn't know, we've aligned with 45% reductions by 2030. One of the key things for the SAC is that equal partnership we have also with manufacturers involved, as well as brands and retailers. So there is a partnership here in looking at those areas of where to work. And this is where I look at here and it's an interesting one. And I still claim to be relatively new. I'm a few months in, but what people keep telling me is we actually know what needs to happen. We know the areas that we need to work on, and things like the elimination of coal in the production, the move to renewable energy. We know what needs to happen. The key issue is, I think, and everybody's been using a similar sort of phrase, but it's around how do we drive collective action to do that? And that's around collective action on raising funding to deliver and support these things. Innovative ideas like the looking at green bonds in terms of delivering against this. I think VF Corporation issued in February 2020 $500 million bonds in relation to their sustainability work. Collective action in terms of building on programs that already exist and looking to scale. So the Clean by Design by Apparel Impact Institute. And that's where we see the role in bringing together that partnership of manufacturers, brands, retailers to build on those programs. And the third piece is collectively working on the policy side and working to address and influence that.
Fantastic, thanks, Andrew. And we'll touch a little bit more on the policy side later in the next panel as well. So it's perfect teeing up. Thank you very much. And then finally, we want to hear from Lorraine. So Lorraine, you also have carried out analysis on the tier 4, so the raw materials part of the value chain. So it'd be great to hear from you in terms of what your analysis contributed in terms of understanding the tier 4 challenges that we face, and particularly, how you see Textile Exchange also having a key role in supporting the decarbonisation of that particular part of the value chain.
Absolutely, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, and I kind of echo everyone's comments. It was inspiring to hear the poetry and yeah, definitely warmed my heart. And so many times we get into the technical pieces of this, of how we're going to get it done, that we need to step back up and really touch the stars and really understand why we're doing what we're doing. So yes, just a little bit about Textile Exchange. We have set in collaboration with Sustainable Apparel Coalition and others, that we must get to 45%. To do less than that is not acceptable. We focus on the fiber and material space. We will be taking this as a balanced and holistic approach. We need to reduce greenhouse gases, but we need to do that in a way that doesn't jeopardize the life that we have around biodiversity, soil health, and water. So we will also be doing this in a way that amplifies those impacts. We've done some in-depth analysis and collaboration with HIG and the MSI greenhouse gas midpoints. We took our top fibers that are utilized in our member base and kind of looked at what does it take to get into that preferred space, defining what preferred fiber is as far as reducing those greenhouse gases and amplifying those other positive ways. And this is kind of where it starts. We need to take each one of these fibers and materials and get them into the aggressive substitution to preferred fibers. And you can see that that still leaves a significant innovation gap. And so it will be improvements on maybe some magic material, but there's a lot of work that's being done. How do we drive those innovative materials to scale? And the other thing is that we really need to make consideration, and Andrew mentioned we have a lot of data. They collect data, we collect data. And one of the things that is not taken into consideration is these numbers, is where the regenerative practices and the potential for carbon sequestration on all of our land-based fibers. For example, wool and leather do not currently have a preferred option in the MSI, let alone one that represents regenerative practices. So I think we have a lot of potential with our land-based fibers to take them from a carbon cost to actually contributing positively in reducing carbon in our atmosphere. Again, we focus on the fiber material space. One of the next steps that we will be doing is each one of these fibers has a round table. We have about 2,400 people involved in this. So each one of these materials will be going through, just like Andrew mentioned, as like, how do we take this impact and reduce it by at least, in half, or what does that look like to do the slow growth piece? What does it look like? So each one of these fibers will be working in depth. Those roundtables meet the first 2 weeks of December, and they will be tasked with what is the game plan. So again, Stefan, we can populate 21 and 22 with the deep dive on each one of these fibers in the tier 4 area of what is it going to take to reduce like fertilization and increase regenerative grazing practices and forest management in this land-based piece. So partnering and aligning is definitely where we need to go. And one of the questions you asked, Layla, is, what are the key barriers and opportunities? So I think it is scaling proven solutions. We know what we need to do. A lot of brands are doing capsule programs, or a women's yoga line or baby line. They're doing capsule or token programs, but it's really time to scale proven solutions that delivery. The second thing is making sure you're sending clear market messages. Some of you may know I'm an organic cotton farmer. I can't go it on a maybe. I have to have clear market messages. If I'm going to plant and invest in growing my crop organically, I need your commitment to do so. And especially in this time where we need farmers to invest in these best soil practices and other best practices, they can't do that on a maybe. It's going to have to be with clear market messages. The third thing is a commitment to align focus on scaling what we know works. This is kind of that proven solutions piece, but I think that there's something that goes beyond my actions or Andrew's actions. We need to make, Morton's has called it too, it's like we need to make that connected commitment that here's what we are doing together and here's those step-by-step increments. So that collective commitment and aligned focus on scaling what, we need to double down on what works. The other thing we've got to have is, if I'm going to ask you, Layla, to invest more in that garment or that brand to invest more in a preferred material, you have to understand that you're getting what we call ROI squared, return on your investment and impact. And so that's where we have that burden of proof. I need to be able to show you, to prove to you that the investments that we're making in these preferred solutions, whether it's in better equipment at the mills, on water savings and temperature costs, we have a burden of proof in the supply chain to prove that the investments that are being made are driving impact. And the final thing that I feel like is a big barrier is we've got to accept the reality that the current business model has created the pollution and the poverty and the problems. To think that we're going to get more preferred materials or preferred dyes or preferred solutions, responsible solutions, things that reduce greenhouse gases in the current business model, that we're not going to pay a penny more for, you know, this preferred material, this responsible wool, you know, that is implementing, is pixie dust, quite frankly. You know, it's not going to happen. We have got to move from a mindset of this business model and business as usual, not just in how we're consuming, but to really be honest and take nature-based solutions and the true cost of what it takes to manufacture and source responsibly. So we've got to make that shift from a price to value paradigm to really respect and understand the intrinsic value that's there, all the way back to the farmers and the ranchers, that's women and people in the mills that are spinning and manufacturing. We've got to shift. I think this is the key lever. We can, you know, we can send clear market signals, but if you're not willing to invest and pay, if you're not willing to shift from a price to value paradigm, then this is a big waste of time.
Thanks, Lorraine. I think that's very important to focus on. And actually, we have some questions coming up. So what I might do is turn over to the Q&A section, because you've teed us up perfectly for that. So actually, Carla Magruder and also Dose Sosuga, I hope I said that right, have both asked questions about actually who pays and how do we fund this, exactly to your point, Lilia. So maybe we can go to you, Lorraine, and then maybe also Andrew, to speak a little bit about, you know, how do we see the cost sharing model of this transformation across the value chain? Is it that brands need to pay for everything? Are there smart ways in which we can actually spread those costs around? You know, are there actors who shouldn't have to pay? And, you know, how can we access that quickly? Because to Dosse's point, you know, we keep saying we're going to do it now and it never really happens. So yeah, maybe Lorraine and then Andrew can come in on those comments.
Sure. I think the most, after looking at this and in a number of different ways, I think all of us are going to need to invest in these upfront changes, but ultimately this has to be a market-driven solution. That means me as a consumer, I have to be willing to pay for a pair of socks that last. You know, I have to pay for durable quality goods. And so I think if we do that incrementally and spread the cost of responsible sourcing and responsible product, if it's truly captured in the per garment, it is not that significant cost. So I think it's important that we educate consumers to buy value and to buy durability and buy to their values. And so I think that it has to be a market-driven solution. So yes, brands will be that lever point to pay more for those goods and services, but they need to educate their consumers and turn them into contributors, and that are contributing to being part of the solution rather than part of the problem. So I think there's a huge place in here to engage our neighbors, ourselves, into being responsible contributors to the solution. And it needs to be that market-driven solution. It needs to be in the price of every product that we create.
Thanks, Lorraine. I think then Andrew, maybe we can hear from you, because obviously you represent tier 1 to 3 as well. Do you think that it's enough to kind of increase the consumer awareness to have a better price premium, or what other solutions do you think were needed in those kind of 1 to 3 tiers?
I think it's so I think there's two things. One, I think, is there's something about the partnership across the supply chain that is essential, and that level of that level of fair partnership, equal partnership and fair partnership, that engagement between the brands, the buyers, and throughout the supply chain. But I want to kind of on that build also on what Lorraine said, because I have to reinforce what Lorraine said, but add to it that to enable that to happen, I think better transparency we need to have. And I think I call it better transparency because transparency is a word that's used and so freely. And actually, I think smart transparency that empowers consumers to be able to make those choices in terms of what they are purchasing. Because I think there's a being willing to pay more, but there's also knowing what I'm paying for and knowing, you know, having trust in what I'm paying for. And so I think the work that's being done, and it's not a quick and easy solution, but I think that some of the work that we're doing around transparency as part of the roadmap for our strategic plan with our members, the open data platform that HIGCO is launching in Q1 next year, when consumers and policymakers, CSOs will actually be able to access more of that data. So I think there's definitely something very important about what we do in the marketplace to drive that empowering of consumers. But I also think it needs to be done in a way of fair partnership. And so I can give insights in conversations we have within the SAC that when we were looking at transparency, one of the very clear messages was that the producers in tier 1, 2, 3 were actually going, it's not just about telling everybody what I'm doing. What are you doing, brand? What are you doing, retailer? And I have one great story of one of our manufacturer members standing up in a conference last year and saying he can't wait for the day when the transparent information is there and he can choose which brand he sells to because he can see their performance from an environmental and social perspective. So yeah, I would build on it and say fair partnership and transparency.
Mm. You actually have a very specific question as well, Andrew. Oh, Morten, do you want to jump in first?
Agree on all that was said, and we've talked about the role of consumers for a long time, and I think it's growing, but it's growing from down here and a little bit. So we just can't wait, considering how urgent this is. I totally agree. We need to also be better at offering them to make it an easy choice when you shop. But I think also we need incentives from the system to make sure that actually the business case is there also on the short term to invest and use the right materials, because it's not there. It is more expensive right now. So we also need both investors and government incentives to come in and be part of this transformation.
Thanks, Morten. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. I've been in this since 20 years, in this sustainability field in fashion, and we've always been waiting for the consumer to sort of save, the industry. That's not going to happen. I mean, yes, consumer attitude is changing and it's changing in the right direction, but it's also very diverse, and we can see that, low budget retailers are actually growing over proportionally. Now maybe with Corona that has shifted a little bit, but that was the overall trend. So I think if we really wait for every consumer on the planet to be ready to pay extra and source organic and or buy organic, etc., I don't think it would be great if that would happen, but I don't think that will happen. So realistically, totally agree with what Morten said. We need some incentives, we need some guidance, some boundaries, maybe even legal boundaries to have those incentives in place and to create a level playing field where then the consumers will make the right decisions, whether they have the intrinsic motivation or not, hopefully.
Thanks, Stefan. And I think Ava wanted to jump in as well.
Yes, sorry, just to complement the round, but I don't want to add anything, but just maybe to also add a little bit of a positive note on that I totally agree that, it's key and we need to accelerate that journey. I just think that also with new technology coming in, what we see is that some of the solutions that are not ready to use in market or not in the stores right now are able to be scaled if you put the weight of the industry behind it. And that's what we see. You see really solutions that are amazing. I mean, technology in this terms really helps us to solve this business case. It's not the entire solution, but it will probably add its part to the story. And as Maria said, we all need to work together on this. This is really something that doesn't come from one side. It really needs to shift to this value-driven model. Yes.
Thanks very much, guys. I think this is great. We're having a debate going. There's a few more questions. I think actually we've touched on them already. So Lauren van der Peer said to the SAC team, when is all your data going to be available externally? I think, Andrew, you nodded to the fact that might be quite soon. Will we have full visibility or just partial?
I'm not going to answer the question with a yes or no,
Okay.
because it's a much more complex question when it comes into data sources, what can be shared. But all I can say is rest assured, and I'm happy to take that offline as well with if you can get the details, is there is a move to actually making as much as possible data transparent as can be. And there are, and I'm telling it as it is, but it's a plan, it's a journey that we're on.
Thanks very much, Andrew. And we also had a quick nod to a lot of what Lorraine was saying about the way that we engage farmers and the producers on the ground. And actually also Mohammed Monawar Hossein had also teed up our next panel pretty nicely, because he's talking about the manufacturers in the South needing a really solid business case to want to act. So we will actually be focusing on that quite heavily in the next panel. So Mohammed, I think if we can just hold off on yours very briefly, that would be great. And then so maybe we can just finally finish with a couple of maybe one sentence each for I want to be provocative a little bit. If you could change one big thing about the fashion industry in order to get us to where we need to get to on net zero by 2050 or before, what would that thing be? Is it circularity? Is it dematerialization? Is it a change in the value chain? Everybody, one sentence, just on your immediate response. Maybe Andrew, since you're unmuted, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I was muted, but I was hoping for some time to think.
Okay.
The challenge I have with just saying one thing is, and I'm going to say one line, all of the above.
Okay.
We do have to do, we cannot wait. We have to do each of these things. They on their own will not make the change.
That makes complete sense. Thank you very much. Ava, would you like to go next?
I would really go for action and use the power of the collective. I think this panel is a great example of how the industry is already, working together. And this is really what we need to scale. So action and scale.
I love it. Thanks, Ava. Lorraine, you're next in my list.
I kind of echo what Andrew's saying. It has to be all of the above. Complex problems require multiple interventions. And so it's time for us to move from islands of good to this force for change of connected strategies of really bringing these proven solutions to scale.
Thanks so much, Lorraine. Morten?
Value over volume, and all of the above.
I'm going to ban all of the above as an answer now. Stefan?
Let's do it now. I'm tired of discussing what we should be doing. We have to do it, and totally agree. I mean, not much more to add, but let's start now.
Amazing. Okay, thank you so much to my fantastic panel. I think so much more we could dive into, and this is very, very much the tip of the iceberg, but I think this is a fantastic beginning also to the long process we'll go through over the next year of really getting into, to grips with this industry alignment process and getting a really clear, transparent set of milestones we can all then map our contributions against. So thank you very much to you all. And now I'm going to pivot to our next panel, which will actually pick up quite a few of the questions we didn't get around to in terms of supply chain dynamics, in terms of, talking about the role of climate justice, talking about people in the global south and what they actually need from the industry and as part of the industry, and also thinking about the role that policymakers and financial institutions can actually play to help with this transition. So I'd like to introduce my speakers. So as I introduce you, please turn your cameras on. So in alphabetical order, Kehua Hu, who is the Director of Sustainability Stewardship at the Chinese National Textile and Apparel Council. Rahul Bajikar, who is the Managing Director at GOTS, Global Organic Textile Standard. Rubana Huq, who is the President of the BGMEA, Bangladesh Garment Manufacturers and Exporters Association. And Shari Friedman, who is the Senior Strategy Officer for Climate Change for the IFC. Welcome, panel. So I'm very excited to dive into these questions because I think we already heard them creep up in the last panel that actually there are these really important dimensions about the geographical elements of this transition and how we actually respect the divergent geographical needs around decarbonisation and the importance of having lots of different voices involved in the approach to create this shared milestone piece. So thankfully, almost everybody who we're engaging in the process, either is working with or is actually part of more of the production regions or the kind of global south or, countries that are sort of middle or emerging income. So it's fantastic to hopefully be able to include as many of those voices as possible in the approach as we're molding it. So I wanted to take the chance to talk to this panel because they have some amazing insights into different geographies they're working in and also some of the elements of climate justice that they can touch on, as well as policy and financial interventions. So I first wanted to engage Rubana. Rubana, we obviously BGMEA is a very important organization. Bangladesh is a huge production region. It'd be really interesting to hear your insights in terms of, why do you think climate is important for the producers that you represent or in more generally in the global south? How do climate and energy issues already affect BGME members? Because I think we often see this as, an issue of the future, but actually in quite a few countries, including Bangladesh, some of these impacts are already beginning to hit home. So is this something that your members are aware of? And is it actually affecting them? Is it a priority for them or is it still sort of too abstract for them to engage with?
Thank you very much for inviting me to be a part of the panel. Truly honored. Just wanted to make one point clear, and that is, in general, the country has pursued this anyway as a major agenda. So in the last few decades, the global south has emerged as the manufacturing hub of the world. And as long as Bangladesh's apparel, as far as Bangladesh's apparel industry is concerned, which employs 4.1 million workers, and is the main formal sector and has a huge population, automatically we have a lot to do. And it is incredibly important for us because we're just not an inward-looking economy. We depend on the West as well. We depend on the rest of the globe. So we need to align anyway. And unfortunately, Bangladesh is actually the most vulnerable country to climate change as well, with a population of 170 million. The adverse impact of climate change could be devastating for our lives and our livelihoods. But ironically, please also remember, while you question about the industry, Bangladesh is actually one of the lowest carbon emitters of the world. So our per capita carbon emission is just around 0.48 metric ton. And ADB has just said that, we will lose about 36.49% of our GDP capita due to climate change in 2040 and to 2059. So we would have a lot of climate refugees in Bangladesh. So since we are going to be the victim of climate change, so we are getting prepared to combat climate change, and we are trying to find adaptation sinks as policy in the government as well. But it's also required to understand that the global fashion industry has a huge role to play here in reducing the carbon emission, and being the main hub of apparel production in the global South has a huge role to play, but we need investment to act upon this. So climate issues are definitely one of our priority issues, as we are partner to the global fashion brands, and all the major fashion brands have their pledges to their customers. But the main duty or emission reduction comes to our shoulder, as 70 to 80% of the emissions are associated with manufacturing. So we need more strategic relationship with the buyers, not just for the heck of compliance, but to be a true partner of sustainable growth. And I was listening with rapt attention the discourse in the last panel, and there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of ask. I just don't know where the alignment is going to be. As far as responsible consumerism is concerned, are the brands doing enough to ensure that that's happening? Are the brands also saying that instead of just telling us what to do in terms of sustainable production, what about sustainable sourcing from us? What about the accountability there? And what about thinking even for 1 second that what's going to happen to the poor workers, the 4.1 million workers who are in Bangladesh and other third world countries, in case if there is any kind of lapses from the brand's end. So, a collective responsibility, a collective commitment and accountability must emerge. And we just cannot be talking about a lopsided responsibility here. So we also would want to remind all of you that, out of the top 10 green factories in the world, 9 are in Bangladesh. So we do have green production, we don't have the green prices. Who's going to be paying for that? Whether the consumers are at all willing to, or is raised to zero still exempts consumers and brands will be my question. Thank you.
A very good question. I think we need to pivot back on that a bit later on in the panel. One question I would have as a follow-up, Rubana, is you've spoken very lucidly about the fact that there are those actors in Bangladesh who really are motivated to change, and that there are green factories, and there is this impact being felt already, and that you need other actors to step up and support this transition. Is there anything either from a sort of national government perspective or even an international government perspective? So for example, thinking about the role of the EU with the US, what can policymakers at each of those levels do to help the global South, carry out this transition? What does that look like in more tangible terms?
So I'll be quick with this, but the couple of asks that we have is, of course, access to low-cost finance in terms of really going green. Lack of, we have to have sector-specific climate action as well. the availability of data on energy consumption also needs to be widely available. We need to, there are significant mismatches with the national strategic plans and the global ones. So we need to align them, of course. But also, the additional problem is that all these investments are necessary at a time when the fashion industry is suffering and fashion sales are down by 60% because of COVID-19. So we don't have such investment capacity. So if we have the second wave, brands have already started their order cancellation. So we, being the apex trade body, are doing a lot of policy advocacy to the government and other concerned stakeholders to make a conducive policy to foster climate action by its members. And BGMEA is at the forefront because we were the task force member of the Green Economic Zone Guideline of Bangladesh Economic Zones Authority. We were associated with the Ministry of Water Resources for the industrial water use policy. We're also working on awareness building and education, and also capacity building through projects like PAC, with GIZ, with IFC, and with everyone else. We have been able to reduce corporate tax by 2% for certified green buildings. And we've created a $200 million green EDF fund from Bangladesh Bank, so that we've also encouraged a green upgradation and technological upgradation fund, which is going to be available soon. But at the same time, we must have ethical sourcing mechanism set from the brand's end. So as a manufacturer, when we go to the bank for financing a renewable energy of energy efficient technology to reduce my emission, the bank also locally has to have that pledge to support the green growth. So financial institutions must have the capacity to evaluate the project proposal beyond the usual. And of course, we need our consumers to support us with green price. So while we believe in all that, we also would like to say that the collaboration and the pledge to pursue actively with the policymakers will be continuing. And as far as we're concerned as an industry, we remain committed to the goal.
That's fantastic to hear. And hopefully Shari will also speak a little bit later about some of the work the IFC has been doing around, the innovative financial mechanisms and the sort of link to policy that will actually help some of those barriers unlock, because we're all grappling with that exact challenge at the moment. So thank you so much, Rubana. So I will now pivot to Rahul. So Rahul, because obviously you're also engaged a lot in the value chain, both on the agricultural and the SME producer side, it'd be great to hear from you a little bit about, what are the approaches that a certification scheme can take, working with SMEs and smallholders to kind of encourage them to have climate ambitions and solutions within their own approaches, and what limitations do you find?
So thank you. First of all, thank you for having me here. I represent GOTS. Now, we basically are a processing standard, so we cover tier 1 to tier 3, really. We don't cover tier 4, which is production of the fiber itself. But we can influence a little bit in this sector. We have a few limitations. Now, I'm sorry to say a few things here, but at the risk of sounding a little pessimistic, I'm going to put in a bit of a cautionary note to what we are all saying here. Because I think the goal is pretty clear, and I don't think anyone can move away from that. And that is something which is something that everyone accepts. So certification schemes, especially when you talk about voluntary sustainability schemes, have limitations, especially if it has a global outreach. We're working with a whole lot of small and medium enterprises. For example, GOTS has 8,000 plus facilities, most of which are entirely dependent on what is available to them. So just to give you an example, for if you would like to say, why don't you move away from coal? Yes, it can be done, but do they have an alternative? Most of them get electricity from the grid. So if the grid is not available, if there's no viable alternative available, it might be difficult for us to say something like that. You might want to say, why don't you look at solar power or something like that? That is a huge investment. There are a lot of things at play here. And I think requirements, whatever we want to put there, have to be practicable, have to be equitable, And you must recognize available infrastructure, because costs can be extremely prohibitive if they're not supported. So therefore, I think support has to come from all quarters, my personal opinion. Needs to be policy, needs to be the local government, needs to be a national level policy, needs to be commerce. We already heard about the finances, and also business, which means your entire business partners. If we don't have, and I might use a statement that you might have used, smart interventions, we might have a little difficulty in achieving what we want to achieve. However, it's very clear that we need to make that step. We need to take those steps. We need to ask our people to go in a direction which is right. We don't have a second planet. We have to use what we have, and we must have business partnerships in place which cover everyone. And starting with the consumer, Larry talked about having consumer market-driven solutions. That's true, but we need to look at the global south, as you call it, the production countries, that I would say, what is it that they have access to? And if not, could we make that access available? In a short, that's what I would like to say here.
Thank you, Rahul. I think that's extremely clear. And to be honest, a very important voice in this whole process. So I think that's very much going to be something that we keep taking into account when we're building the milestones. Conscious of time, what I'm going to do is pivot now to Kehwa. So maybe, Kehwa, we can ask you to reflect on the context that you see in the China perspective, because obviously Syntac is very active within China production. Particularly, how do you see Syntac being positioned to help with decarbonisation in that context? And also, again, what do you think the considerations are that we need to take, either for Chinese producers themselves, or maybe also places where China is active globally?
Okay, thank you, Leila, for having me here to participate in this great event. And Syntac is the China National Textile and Apparel Council, as the representative of all the Chinese textile industry related interest in China. So Syntac set up the net zero of carbon emission by 2050 in 2017, and initiated the Climate Stewardship 2030 program to create a roadmap for the textile and apparel companies, and I mean make them on the track of the decarbonization rapidly from from the zero based toward zero emission of carbon. And so next year we will have the first committed company to achieve the zero carbon factory, and all their factories by 2030 to toward the net zero. So this company is giant apparel company in China. We are not only mobilized industry company to contribute in this movement, but also we try to mobilize the decision maker, especially in the local, we call it the textile cluster. So the position of the Syntac in the decarbonization for the global climate goal is like an accelerator. Because as an accelerator in China for the climate is not easy, because especially in this industry. But we think the Syntac is like a bridge for the between the production side also and the consumer side, because the China will be China is the biggest production country for the textile sector and the fashion sector, but also will be the future consumption market in the world. So we have this responsibility and accountability to contribute in this, global crisis in this planet. So the position of us, if we talk about the accelerator, we need to provide a solution for our industry and also for our country to prove this is possible. I mean, it could be happened not only for the production side, but also for the consumer side, and I mean for the people. So I mentioned we try to accelerate this process because we try to mobilize the local cluster I mentioned before, like just on 26 October, we have a local cluster. Keqiao is a leading world-class textile cluster, declared their action plan for climate stewardship, because its economy is exactly based in printing and the dyeing sector, with the industry GDP of $15 billion annually. So, I mean, this is big progress because people always said the brand or the buyers are the key player. I mean, the leaders for the climate action, but we can, it's difficult to mobilize the upstream companies or the sectors to contribute in this movement. But we can see that not only the leading companies in the upstream sector, but also the local policy maker, they are also realize this opportunity for them to contribute in this movement. So CNTech would be as an accelerator to bridge the different stakeholders. So if we talk about the role of the Chinese textile industry in this global trend, we think we are the accelerators. So yeah, thank you, Leila.
Thank you so much, Kehua. So what I'll probably do is come to Sherry first, and then maybe we can open it up to Q&A and ask a few more follow-up questions to you guys. So Sherry, I want to turn to you just because a lot of people have been talking about the need for financial solutions, and obviously that's what the IFC particularly specializes in. So I'm really keen to hear from you in terms of, you know, what you see the role of a kind of shared industry vision playing in terms of actually unlocking some of those financial flows, and also what kinds of solutions you're actually seeing being effective for addressing SME needs or those of the, you know, the global south in the textile value chain.
Great, thanks. So much of what has been said already, I will probably echo. I think that there's a couple of themes that are emerging that are really important. And I think that one of those themes is the idea that something like this framework, this roadmap is going to create scale. It's going to create a momentum. It's kind of like you had those poems, and those poems get everybody's energy moving. Like you would have the wind starts, and then this roadmap's like the windmill. You know, it takes all that energy and all that momentum, and it puts into something that will move together and create a product. And so that's what hopefully this roadmap will do. And from a financier's perspective, that's really important because scale and an activity inside of a sector is what will draw the financing over there. Just in a process of just scale, and there's more to invest in, but it starts to, when people see the movement there, when banks start to see the movement there, they build internal capacity to be able to address that movement. So that's, I think, one of the biggest, from a financial point, one of the biggest pieces that's really important about the roadmap and these different efforts that are putting together concerted efforts. Regarding what the financial tools are that can come in to help to solve some of these issues. I mean, financing big projects that have good returns is never a problem. I mean, if you have a social environmental benefit, the investors, and it's big and it's profitable, the investors are basically tripping over themselves to get to it. So what you have, the issue is when the projects are small, or when there's a risk, either a real or perceived risk, or an underlying financial system issue in a country. That's when you have to come in with some type of more innovative financing. And just to also reiterate something that Raul had said, which is that the solutions become complicated when you start looking at them. So, you know, I know that Morton had mentioned that there's 50% of the solutions that they looked at have positive returns. And that's great. And it's a good news. Not all of those are necessarily easily financeable for various reasons. When you start to dig under, as a colleague of mine says, when you get granular, it gets difficult very quickly. So at that point, there's a couple of things that we can do. One of them is bundling small projects. And again, that sounds easy, but having consistency among the projects is really important. That's kind of where categorization and certification comes in. And this is another theme that I hear keep coming up. You want to, when you're financing, you want to be able to look at something and evaluate it pretty quickly and understand whether it's green or whether it's not green. And for there, you can't, I think the idea of being able to certify something, that the main thing is to be able to make it easy, to be able to have done the upfront work in the back end, so that every single project, you don't have to spend time doing an entire environmental analysis. So you could check it off pretty quickly. And when you combine these two things together, you see things emerging like green bonds, where you have very clear pieces that are easily checked off. You have these things qualify for a green bond, and then you have one financial bundling instrument where investors can put money into it, and then it can go out to smaller projects. And you see that a lot through banks. A lot of our green bond investment goes in through banks, and then banks have the ability to evaluate smaller projects as they go on. You can create a fund if you have some consistency. So I'll stop there. I could probably go on and on. There's sustainable, I will just mention there is other tools like sustainable supply chain finance, which Puma has some really innovative products on that. And the final thing I just wanted to mention on this is blended finance, which could come in really as a tool underlying any of them. That is when you have a barrier that is a temporary barrier where you can put some concessional finance in that accompanies commercial finance to overcome a temporary barrier. And the main key is that you're doing this where you see a scalable commercial potential in the market. You can't do it just to prop up something eternally. So I'll stop there.
Oh, it's fantastic, Sherry. And I'm only stopping a little bit because I'm conscious of time. But yes. I think what I might do is, so we give Gonzalo a chance to close as well. What I might do is to quickly pivot to you and then a couple of other speakers just on the the topic of, how can policymakers really, if you had one ask to policymakers that you could make, what would it be in terms of how can they set up the conditions to unlock these financial flows?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So Layla, as you know, we have a podcast, the Climate Biz podcast. Layla and Stefan were on it talking about sustainable finance. I strongly urge people to do it. And to go and check it out. You can check it out on iTunes. At the end of this podcast, we always ask people, these are CEOs, these are banks, they're corporations. We always say, if you had one wish, fairy godmother wish to ease your sustainability transition, what would it be? And I would say about 80% of the business people that we talk to say something that is related to a policy or a regulation. And the majority of those is a carbon price. So I would definitely, obviously a carbon price, but if you're going to go country by country, I think the main regulations that needed to be changed are along renewable energy. I think that they have to, it's very difficult from a financial perspective to be able to scale renewable energy when there's a policy cap on what you can do. And this comes along, distributed generation is probably the biggest one, and also regulations around PPAs. So that I think is probably the single biggest thing in the apparel sector right now.
Thank you so much, Sherry. And maybe I'll just turn to Kehua as well to answer the question from maybe a more Chinese perspective.
Sorry.
Just in terms of the role of policy, so thinking about either the Chinese context or the global context, what one thing do you think that either national or global policymakers can do to help with creating good conditions for the change to happen in the industry?
Yes, yeah, as you know, the Chinese president announced the new climate goal of China in the 75th United Nations Assembly. So to achieve the carbon neutral by 2060. So this is a new policy for us. And we also at the national level, the government is developing the next 5 years plan. maybe the 15 years plan for the peaking carbon emission by 2030. So, and but also at the provincial level, I mean, the provincial government also developing their local policy to adopt to support the national strategy to achieve the carbon neutral, especially in the textile and fashion, the apparel industry. We also move, as I mentioned before, in the big cluster. We encourage the local government to support, I mean, to set up the local policy, because the textile economy is very important. It's a majority of the part of their local economy. So how to make the economy towards this national goal, I mean, contribute to this national goal, not only for the global goals, it's a crucial for them. So we can see the policy would be on the ground to make change. I mean, like China to stop pollution, also to make a high quality development in the future. So I think this policy, I mean, no matter the national policy or the local policy at different levels, it also can have a impact for the global supply chain, I mean, the value chain, because we can foresee this impact would, because China also invest overseas, I mean, in the other country in the sector. So I talked with a big company. They invest in the ASEAN country. They said that they copy their environmental protection measure from China to this target country to make sure their investment responsible and sustainable.
Fantastic.
Because it's true.
Yeah, sorry, I'm so sorry, Kamal. I could let you go on for lots and lots of time, but I'm very conscious we have about 3 minutes left. So maybe I want us to be able to follow up on these conversations. So there will be follow-up emails and recordings and opportunities to discuss. But I really want to hand over to Gonzalo before he has to leave to close out the session. So apologies to cut you off, but maybe we can bring Gonzalo in to close the session for us. Thank you so much to the panel.
Thank you, Laila. I would need to open my camera, but I cannot. If the host can allow me to. Okay, there you are. Thank you. So thank you so much, Laila, and of course to the Fashion Charter. I have to recognize I've learned a lot with such brilliant dialogues, both of them. We have definitely heard today that there is great progress. There's high ambition and a lot of radical collaboration within the fashion industry, and we've also learned and heard that there are still major challenges in achieving the goals set. You definitely have critical mass. Over a third of the industry and you're gaining momentum and are clearly close to fully aligning. So the main challenge we see today is for the sector to finish this off in the next few months so we can focus on implementing. As this one, everyone is always learning that we must act now. Stefan said it while closing the first panel. Let's start now. As we stated with Nigel during the opening of the day this morning, climate action will become a source of competitive advantage, and data-driven transparency systems will allow misaligned companies to be quickly identified. The mentioned common baseline with transparent data is absolutely fundamental. I can see companies here willing to be part of the group of those companies capturing the opportunity.
as Laria mentioned, I also believe the key lever is shifting the business model from price to value paradigm. In order to do so, it will be critical to create plans that account for climate justice and the current limitation for those within the global apparel value chains. Connecting with the material industries and scale the right materials, as it was referred by Stefan. That is also critical for the whole circularity of the sector. We have been texting with Nigel during this session, and he was indeed celebrating the idea of aggressive substitution plus innovation gap. So many things that we're highlighting that open a brilliant, hopeful for the whole world. And it will also be critical to engage other industries, policymakers, and of course, financial institutions like Shari just mentioned, as they are starting to create the right enabling conditions. As we know, the fashion industry value chain is definitely very complex and relating many times several countries and businesses from different sizes, from some of the biggest multinational to very small SMEs. It's a massive challenge, we know that. But it's a challenge with no option than doing it. Ambition must stay high in the face of this challenge. So is the industry really on track for the 1.5 degree now? That's part of the question that we have to answer very rapidly. How can we double down together through processes like this to ensure goals are achieved and focus on real action rather than just dialogue? Taking into consideration some of those difficulties that Rahul properly highlighted, there is an extra opportunity to also collaborate more actively with other sectors like transport and energy. So people, during decades, we have seen how the fashion industry changes our lives really rapidly, sometimes at least twice a year in relation to seasons, right? So the fashion industry can and must change the life of people around the world. Please dress us with climate action and protect us from the impacts of the climate crisis. Thank you very much.